Well, I have to say, so we decided, based on Reverend Tony suggested that since February is the month in which there's St. Valentine, St. Valentine's Day, and St. Valentine's Day is often associated with love, that we would all talk about love in some way. And so Reverend Tony, the first 2 weeks, talked about love in different contexts, and Reverend Vincent next week will also incorporate that into his talk. We can't wait to hear that. And my mom might even be here. That's why I switched out. I don't want to talk to my mom about polyamory. I'm not ready quite for that conversation. No, but really, so you know, that's what came to mind. Like the title of my talk, hot off the presses. A Course in Miracles declares we are all polyamorous. Now, polyamorous has the definition that the world gives it, right? The ego world gives it, and this is the definition. The act of engaging in multiple sexual relations with the consent of all parties involved. Now, I'm not groundbreaking on this idea, on this concept. If you live here in San Francisco, and yesterday I was doing some research on the topic, it is really now in the United States and other parts of the world, is becoming more and more an accepted form of relationship that people have. However, I will say that San Francisco has been in the vanguard of promoting this other type of yes, relationship and different ways and different forms which love can be expressed. And of course, that's what A Course in Miracles is all about. It's not about judging the form of our relationship, how it may look to us as people. It's about removing those obstacles to love that we have. So, as I was preparing this talk, I was thinking to myself, you know, where do I fit on this polyamorous continuum? I've said in the past, you know, oh, I'm polyamorous. And then when I thought about it, I'm like, well, I think sometimes I've been polyamorous, and sometimes I've been more like the guy that is in kind of like an open relationship, where I have a primary partner, and then I have some people on the side who I have a kind, loving relationship with, but it's not actually polyamorous per se. It's not, you know, so I you know, it is a continuum of things. Now, I have to also say to you that these are not easy relationships. Polyamorous relationships, I haven't experienced them as being easy. For me, I'm pretty easy about it. I'm like, yeah, I feel this kindness, this love towards other people, and I don't have some of the issues. But I have had, when I've been in them, I've noticed that my significant others have had issues with me having this type of relationship. And some of that's because of my own flaws in communications. But yeah, sometimes I just notice it. But the Course in Miracles says that's all good. That's okay. Because they're just showing me, if my partner is having some issues, then we know that, like what the Course in Miracles says, it's showing us that that's part of our healing process too. So it's really all okay in how it's working. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about today too is that, you know, there's all kinds of relationships. There's all kinds of forms. And to quote from today's reading, it says, "Love's messengers are gently sent and return with messages of love and gentleness." Now, think about that. Love's messages are gently sent. When we are tempted to judge a form of a relationship that our brothers and sisters, our holy siblings have, we should think about that, right? It's not our place. Whether that relationship is dysfunctional or alternative or challenges our mores, that's an opportunity for us to heal. We can judge it, but it's an opportunity for us to heal. So I work at a school, and I work in a school setting. And it was interesting. I'm in a new place this year, new school, and so it was my first Valentine's Day there. And I noticed that both the students and the adults that I worked with were very negative about Valentine's Day. You know, they were like, "Oh, it's a fake holiday." These are some of the things that some of the words I heard. It's a fake holiday. It is a day that they made to make people that are single feel bad. You know, and so it was just very interesting. And I thought to myself that, oh, it's so interesting. Like right now I don't. In my life I don't have a significant, what I would consider a significant other. But I thought, here we go, the Holy Spirit, the great transformer. I think of it that I think it's one of the better holidays. It's celebrating love. It's like, just love everybody. Like, be kind. I didn't say that to the kids. I said, well, just be kind and be outgoing and be friendly. And like one of the teachers who I think had a higher mindset, we did candygrams, and so you could pick a person, and we made sure everybody got something. But pick a person you want to send a nice message to, a thoughtful message to, and so on and so forth. So everybody got something, and I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. That's a different kind of mindset. But it does tell us that I forget sometimes that much of the world is still under this idea, specialness, right? Of where we're looking for that one person to complete us, and if we don't have that one person or that person in our lives, then we feel this lack. And that's what the Course defines as the special love relationship, where we find this one person and they fill us and they meet our needs, and then that's going to make us happy. And of course we know that often doesn't work. Now, what's interesting also is that there are many different kinds of forms of relationships, which I talked about earlier. Polyamory is one, but I also did some research and found some others. There's polygamy, which is where one person has multiple wives. Now, and I imagine in the future that might come around where one woman has multiple husbands as we expand. I heard that. There is the asexual person. So there is this another group of folks that consider themselves asexual, which means they don't experience sexual attraction in relationships. But this was interesting. What I found out in my researching with folks that are asexual is that they still will sometimes have relationships which they engage in sex. Because part of it is they do want to be in a relationship, and it's part of being in a relationship with their partner. So they do it as a way to to connect with their partner, but they don't necessarily have this kind of attraction. And there is this other form of relationship now called relationship anarchy. This I thought was kind of funny. There are two primary ideas behind relationship anarchy. Number one, they reject expectations and rules of traditional relationships. And they reject, here's where I think it syncs with the Course, they reject sexual relationships, they reject the idea that the sexual if you have a sexual relationship with another person, that's any better or superior than relationships you have that are non-sexual. Okay, so I thought, oh, that's pretty Course, pretty Course on the line with the Course. So there you have it. Now, what about spiritual experiences or divine experiences that are sexual in nature? Ooh, right? That's a hot topic. What if we said that in some Sunday churches today? The divine erotic experience.
Wow.
Okay, all right, so I did some research on this. In the Middle Ages, where we often talk, it's called, I teach history, it's called the Dark Ages, there was a lot of divine spiritual sexual experiences. It was a period of time when there were a lot of Christian mystics. One of them was a nun by the name of Hildegard of Bingen, who was a mystic. Now, a mystic is a person that reports having spiritual experiences with the divine. And she claimed that these spiritual experiences were sometimes erotic. And in fact, every Sunday, if you're Catholic, you go to communion. She dressed the nuns that were in her order, they all dressed up in wedding dresses to receive communion. Okay, because the idea was that I guess it's kind of the bride of Christ. So that's from maybe the Christian or Catholic view. There is probably the most famous Sufi mystic is Rumi. Some of you may have heard of Rumi, and he writes many, what only we can call romantic erotic poems that describe his relationship with Allah, or the one God. Even in the Course in Miracles community, I've heard Gary Renard say that he's had a divine experience that had an erotic element. So, we have kind of these, different experiences all along the road. So I think it's really, really important for us, I think if we take a look at our societal experiences with sex and sex attitudes, it seems like oftentimes there's extremes that are presented, right? There is the one extreme where sex causes a lot of problems, that you should define sex very strictly within a monogamous relationship, which is again, of course, the miracle is not about fine. If two people decide to be in a monogamous relationship, that is totally cool, right? But the problem becomes when we start judging sex and we start imposing judgments and shame upon people for their choices around it, whatever we may think about it, right? Whatever we may think about it. So that's where the problem kind of comes in. But at the same time, the Course in Miracles teaches us to be right-minded. And, I think sometimes that sex is exploited. That sometimes in our society, in our culture, again, I'm not judging it, I'm just observing it, that sometimes sexual images are presented too early to young people. I work with young people. And so we're seeing, like, sometimes young people becoming sexualized at an earlier and earlier age. And, I didn't ask for guidance on that, but I wonder if that's really a healthy thing. Are they really emotionally equipped for that, for having their bodies start at an earlier age of maturing? I don't know. But sometimes, women and everyone, are offered up these images that I don't know if they're necessarily healthy. Even young boys are now, they have all these superhero little figurines or whatever, and everyone's buff. Everyone's the super buff person. And so a lot of young boys are thinking that their bodies aren't good enough because they don't look like the superheroes. So it all kind of plays in, and we have to, I think, still be aware of this. Okay? Again, like the Course in Miracles tells us what's the ego's view, what's the Holy Spirit's point of view. We still have to make our assessment and follow our guidance. Now, in the Course in Miracles, there's I believe there's about 600 biblical references that Jesus in the Course in Miracles retranslates. One of the ones that I can remember offhand is he quotes in the Course in Miracles, he says, in the Bible it says, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." Okay? "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." Now you might just, if you hear that quote, right, what do you think? Okay. You think that it means that God, and this is in the Old Testament, many of them are in the Old Testament, that God says it's okay to take vengeance, right? "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." Okay? You think it's all right to take vengeance. So a lot of people use that in the old times, because the Old Testament God, if you read the Old Testament God was very much like the authoritative father. Some days he loved you, some days he hated you, some days he took vengeance out on you, some days he gave you mercy, and so on and so forth. So what the Course in Miracles does, it changes that. And what Jesus says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, can be reinterpreted to mean, give your vengeful thoughts over to me, over to the Holy Spirit. Surrender them. Now, isn't that brilliant? Okay, that's brilliant. And I think that's what I'd like to do today with this idea of polyamory. The truth is that we are all capable of loving every person that we encounter in our lives. And the Course in Miracles, talks about this, that we are capable of actually doing this. One of the experiences, or one of the things it talks about in the Course in Miracles, is the obstacles we have to love. In fact, that's the miracle. That is the miracle. Is that when we have an experience of not loving someone, when we experience fear or anxiety or sadness or any of those feelings in a relationship, that's when we need the miracle. So if we're all honest, most of us, still working, we're on that ladder of enlightenment, like we're moving up the ladder, okay? But we still need, those experiences, I remember just yesterday, one of my good friends, I was hoping to be able to see and go to Reverend Vincent's party yesterday, and I thought that we were going to go together, and it turns out that he wasn't able to go, and I didn't feel like it was communicated in a way that I liked, and it didn't meet my expectation. And so I heard, I heard my ego speaking, I heard my ego like, oh, first thing is I wanted to get back at him. Well, if he thinks we're going to get together on Wednesday, he's got another thing coming. Right? Hear my ego, speaking. And like, oh, isn't this interesting? I'm preparing this talk on loving everyone, and I'm having attack thoughts, But that's the time, when we go within, all right, we go back to the source point and we say, oh, maybe that's not, maybe that's really not what is maybe that's not what's really in our best interest, right? And so I think really what polyamory really means is this, if you think about, like, to me, poly, multiple, amory, to me means love, right? And so I really think that what we are is that we can take this idea, and really what we're called to do is we're called to love everyone in every situation. And what I see in this community, what I see in the broader Course in Miracles community, and what I see in my own life is that more and more, it's like I don't react to people's personalities as I respond to their personalities. And in the sense that, oh wow, I can hear that negative thought like I did with my colleagues, and I hear it as ego noise, but I don't react to it. I just think, oh, how does the Holy Spirit respond to this? That's all it is. And the Course in Miracles talks about, like I said in my meditation, there's nothing to fear, right? Like we think, like I was just recently reading I was reading a story about addiction and someone that was overcoming addiction, and how for 6 years they were in this bottomless despair of the addiction, and just where they wanted to, they were close to suicide. But then the shift happened and they moved out and they got, into recovery, and they found a higher power and so on and so forth, And when I think about that, I think to myself, well, we also go through those dark times, right? We go through those dark times. But remember what the Course says. Even sometimes when they feel heavy and they feel so powerful, the Course says, you're so close. The miracle's right there. They feel like they're a granite block wall, right? Reverend Rudy, they feel like they're just so terrible. And what the Course in Miracles says, no. It's like the fog. I'll move the fog away. It's like a veil of sand. What is sand? Is falls away, right? It's like this thin veil. So our job is when we're in those places, or our mighty companions are in those places, is to call for love, to be willing to have the obstacles removed. We are all polyamorous. That's my talk for today.